I don't know about you, but I love seeing photos, old photos of the town that I love, which happens, of course, to be Memphis. Those old black and white grainy shots that show the way things used to be. Every time I see one, whether it's in a publication or on a wall somewhere, I always just stop and analyze it because I want to see what was going on there. And I like knowing the history of a place. And Memphis is a special place. Of course, its location in the U.S., and really critically in its early stages, our location on the Mississippi River really made us a key and strategic waypoint. Now, you've probably heard the phrase that history is written by the winners, but sometimes some of the most important people fade away from the story. But we're going to fix that today. Today, we're going to talk to a history detective. He didn't know I was going to call him that. And we're going to find out more about a man who most Memphians don't recognize at all, but was a critical component and part of Memphis's history. And we're going to talk about what he did to make this city a reality. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Current Temp, brought to you by Lexus of Memphis. Of course, you know that Lexus is a great sponsor, a great partner with us here, and we're so glad to have them with us. And today we're going to check on a historical temp. We're going to learn amazing stuff about this city that was built on grit and grind. And to help me do that today, I'd like to welcome my longtime friend and accomplished author, Mr. Scott Williams. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Joey. It's great to be here.
This is the part where I get to brag and embarrass you, and you have to sit there quietly for just a moment. Scott and I have known each other a long time. Not even going to go into that. I could do photos and cool stuff, but we got things to talk about. So let me tell you a little bit about his resume. Scott has been a marketing director. I'm going to goof this up, but just stay with me.
No worries.
And a big shot at Graceland in the marketing department. He left from there to go to the Museum, which was in downtown D.C., right across from the Capitol building, which is part of the amazing story of him. And then he got recruited to Discovery Park of America in West Tennessee, which you're going to hear about later in the season. We got more with Scott later in another episode. But first, I want to talk about Scott as an author, all right? And we got on the screen behind us here 3 of his books, all right? The first one, and I've read all of these, was called An Odd Book about Odd McIntyre, one of the original, what would you call him, personality journalists?
He was a reporter. He was a journalist,
right.
An entertainment journalist.
Entertainment journalist, great read. Then we've got one that fascinated me, The Forgotten Adventures of Richard Halliburton, who has a tie-in to West Tennessee and was the sort of the inspiration for Indiana Jones.
Yeah, that's right. His parents lived over by Rhodes College. Midtowners.
Then he had the accidental fame and lack of fortune of West Tennessee's David Crockett. You may know him as Davy, but that's not why he's here. He's here today to talk about a new book that's about to come out called Townmania, and it focuses on a man named Marcus Winchester. All right.
Okay.
The first question.
Okay, I'm ready. This is the first. You're the first person I've talked to about the book, and so this is the first question
about the book.
About the book.
You have no idea what the.
No idea. I'm ready.
Where did the name Townmania come from?
I can answer that question really easily.
All right. By the way.
I'm gonna have to read it. So Marcus Winchester's father, James Winchester, wrote to John Overton in 1818, "I am satisfied the effects of Townmania will not last always and perhaps not long." So they were hustling to get Memphis off the ground.
Okay. All right. So that's why it's called Townmania. By the way, a great line, great tie-in. And
when I came across that letter in the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and I read that line in that letter, I was like, boom.
That's it.
That is the name of my book.
Well, and let me set the table a little bit more. Scott does extensive research on history. I mean, combs the countryside, drives all over, not just the Mid-South. You've gone even farther than that to get into old libraries and go to old cemeteries and do microfiche research, just exhaustive. It's really impressive. And I was going through some of these photos that you have culled, and this one of what I'm assuming is the Memphis Landing.
Yeah, that's how it used. That's what it used to look like when you would pull up in a boat to go up to Memphis. That was around in 1850s, in that era, and so you would go up. That would be mud. Of course, imagine what it would be like when it was pouring down rain.
Honestly, I can see the horses trying to pull the stuff up that hill. So let's start with this. You're a great historian of West Tennessee. Marcus Winchester, the only thing I'm familiar with as a Memphian is the street Winchester. Mm-hmm. But you're saying that's not even named after Marcus. Who is Marcus Winchester?
So I was introduced to Marcus Winchester by David Crockett.
Okay.
Now, no one's uttered that for at least a couple hundred years. So I'm the first one to bring that up.
You got interested in it when you were doing the research on David.
That's right. David Crockett introduced me to Marcus Winchester, and it's a fascinating story. I won't go into the David Crockett story because that's for a podcast book. Years ago.
That's another book.
And so ultimately, David Crockett, through some mistakes, ended up on Patty's Hen and Chicken. Have you ever heard of that? It was a series of islands in the Mississippi River.
It's funny you say that.
Oh, look at that!
I've got the map right here. How about that?
We didn't even arrange that.
We did not arrange that.
We are
magic.
We are simpatico.
That's what happens.
So David Crockett ends up naked, alone in the dark, and a steamboat came, and basically David Crockett said, "Take me to your leader." So he took him to Memphis.
What is Patty's Hens and Chickens?
It was what the folks on the river called a series of islands, like mud islands and buildup of sediment.
They called it
Patty's Hen and Chicken.
By the way, if you can see that, if you're watching this on YouTube or video or on Facebook, this is the Mississippi River, and I'm assuming this is Memphis.
That's Memphis.
And that's where Davy was. Mm-hmm. Okay, so continue.
Mm-hmm. So, and it was named after a guy named Patty, who was actually, very early Memphian.
Okay.
Who owned one of the very first bars and restaurants in Memphis. So, you got to read the book to find out about that. So David Crockett said, "Take me to your leader." They took him to Marcus Winchester. So you and I met on the carport of Graceland.
Correct.
Became instantly great friends.
Yep.
That's what happened with David Crockett and Marcus Winchester. They took David Crockett to Marcus Winchester and his wife, Amarante Loisel, and David Crockett and Marcus Winchester just became instant best friends. And so David Crockett dressed him, Marcus Winchester dressed David Crockett, got him in clothes, fed him instead of being naked. So they began secretly funding David Crockett's campaigns because David Crockett was very much not in the camp of Andrew Jackson by that time, and Marcus Winchester was part of that whole Andrew Jackson, Tennessee family.
Let's jump in there. How does Marcus Winchester get to Memphis?
Okay.
Because that's where this whole thing started.
Let's do it.
How would you set that up?
So Marcus Winchester, hung out with Andrew Jackson and John Overton and all these folks. And he had been in the War of 1812 with his father and Andrew Jackson. And David Crockett Marcus Winchester had actually become a prisoner of war in a Canadian prison, very, very young. And so when he got out, he ended up going with Andrew Jackson to the Treaty of 1818 negotiations with the Chickasaw. And as it turned out, they said, "Hey, look, how can we trust you? You were supposed to give us presents," they called them. "You were supposed to give us presents," and they came damaged. And so Andrew Jackson said, "Well, I don't know if I believe that. I'm going to send Marcus Winchester to check it out." So it was on the 4th Chickasaw Bluff there in what would become Memphis. And Marcus Winchester did a thorough inventory, and it was fun to look at what he wrote, and he evaluated each thing.
You're saying us getting the land from the Chickasaw Indians?
Well,
not us,
that's what
them.
They were having the conversation. So they were trying to get the treaty worked out.
Okay.
But the Chickasaw were like, or the Cherokee were like, "Hey, we're not going to trust you. You sent us these presents," which were part of a previous negotiation.
What were the presents?
Presents were like beads and furs and
just stuff.
Guns, it was all rusted. And basically, we sent them, Americans sent them garbage.
It sounds like a ripoff.
It was a ripoff.
Okay.
And so Marcus Winchester.
We're not endorsing ripoffs.
We are not.
This is really history.
This is history.
Right. Okay.
In my version.
That's what we're here for.
My version.
Give us your version.
And so Marcus Winchester went back. They signed the deal. Now, unbeknownst to many people, Andrew Jackson and Marcus Winchester's father and John Overton already had a little side deal going. They had already purchased West Tennessee, the rice tract, what would become Memphis. They had already bought that, knowing that they were going to one day do a treaty and get it away from the Native Americans. So it's a little bit of insider trading.
This sounds kind of shenanigans.
Yeah. But now think about it. So Andrew Jackson, John Overton, and James Winchester's Marcus's dad, they all had big mansions in Nashville, which, by the way, they still do. So you could do a tour of each one of their mansions in a Saturday in Nashville, and I highly recommend it. I've done it. So. So they're not gonna move to live in the mud,
right? And the wilderness. They're gonna stay in
wilderness. It's mud.
Nashville.
It's miserable. People are getting yellow fever, and it's not a fun place. It's maybe 50 people living there. A combination of trappers, some Native Americans lived there. So it was a real rough and tumble kind of place. Marcus Winchester was raised in Nashville in a mansion. He went to school in Baltimore. Very educated, very fancy schmancy. People who wrote about him years later always said he was dressed impeccably. He wore bow ties. So as you can see on the cover, I wrote on the one I gave you, bow tie. So he was always impeccably dressed. And many people commented on this is not the kind of person you would expect to find, in Memphis, in a village,
a rough and tumble. At that point, the Wild West.
Yeah, it was the Wild West. And so, for whatever reason, he decided to go back and stay. And so his Andrew Jackson quickly sold his little piece of Memphis.
Okay.
And some think he never really even visited. So he got rid of it, and they sold it to Marcus Winchester's dad and uncles, and so there's a lot of people owned little pieces of it. But they sent Marcus and a guy named William Lawrence, who was a surveyor. They left Nashville, went up the river to the Ohio and down the Mississippi, and they arrived and they made Memphis home. And so Marcus was there until the day he died.
Well, and so let's because again, I knew nothing about this guy, but he had a lot of key early jobs. What are some of the roles he played? I know he was postmaster.
Yeah, well, so the very first thing he did was he wrote his dad quickly and said, "You got to get me everything you can to sell," because people would be coming up and down the river headed towards New Orleans, or down the river headed towards New Orleans. Natchez, Memphis was a stopping point, and he said, "Get me everything you can to sell." And so he set up the first store.
Would they walk up and down this giant? I guess they had to because of the bluff.
They would typically, based on everything I've read, go into the Wolf River. If you look at some of the earlier maps, you can see where the Wolf is.
There we go.
Yeah, right there. So that's how you could get your boat in there.
Okay.
And unload there at the Wolf.
So he opens a general store.
So he opens a store. He gets the first ferry going, and then when they need
because there was no Memphis Bridge, if I'm not mistaken.
You are correct.
Okay, all right.
No bridge. And there were people living across the river, and so they would go back and forth. There was ferry service. He started the first post office. He became the first mayor. He was the first real estate agent. In the book, I call him the first Chamber of Commerce president, even though they didn't really have a Chamber of Commerce.
Sure.
But he was involved in every single aspect of building the city. When people would come to the city, they often wrote that Marcus Winchester was the person that they were taken to, and they wrote about how enthusiastic he was about the location, about the opportunities, about the things that was going to happen, things that were going to happen there in that city. He acted in the first plays. He donated the land for the first church. He donated the land for the first cemetery, Winchester Cemetery.
Yeah,
he was involved in the first library. There's nothing that happened that you couldn't say that he actually started it. So he had the money and the backing of his family. Now he had family that lived very well in New Orleans, in Nashville, in what would become Middle Tennessee, and up in Maryland. He had a lot of cousins and very successful, affluent family. But for whatever reason, he chose to stay in Memphis. And from all accounts, it was a pretty miserable existence there in Memphis.
Okay. I'm going to get to that in a minute. I have a question. First, real question is it the reason that Memphis became the hub and not the other side of the river, let's say West Memphis, Arkansas, because of the shape of the river here in the Wolf River? What was the key?
Yeah, I think the answer. I'm not a historian, okay, but I think a historian. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm your historian.
You're my historian.
I think most the best answer is cotton. There was a lot of cotton on
our side.
On our side, it's
Okay.
the Delta, and that's where that generated a lot of things. When
Right.
you've got a lot of cotton, you got to get it first of all to market. You got to
Yep.
get the tools and supplies that you need. You have to have, the enslaved people. So all of that was happening right there in Memphis on the Fourth Chickasaw Bluff.
Okay. How dangerous was it at that time? You mentioned it being uncomfortable and unruly in the Wild West. Were they still dealing with Indian attacks? Were there still skirmishes? Were we in the transition period of Memphis becoming more of a civilized sort of Eastern, East Coast community trying to build? What was it like then?
Yeah, based on the things that I read, that people recorded, in first person at the time, they weren't afraid of any type of Native Americans attacking them out of nowhere. That really didn't happen there. In Memphis, of course, it happened out west, and
Right.
it happened a lot of other places, and it had happened in what would become Tennessee before then. But by this point, Andrew Jackson is doing all of his treaties, and Andrew Jackson is trying to get them out of the South. And so
Right. Wasn't that part of the Trail of Tears?
that was part of the Trail of Tears. And, that came out of Andrew Jackson's declaration in 1830 that caused David Crockett to say that, it would be a blight on the future of America.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
the Trail of Tears. And, the Trail of Tears, a very small number, but a lot of Native Americans would camp, and eventually, the Trail of Tears, were some boats that ferried people across to Arkansas, but there were other routes. So there were multiple Trails of Tears, multiple routes.
Right.
But Memphis was just one, and so Marcus Winchester did see and witness Native Americans. And Marcus Winchester, the frustrating thing about writing this book is that anything he wrote related to how he felt or what he thought or any political or racial or any kind of thoughts like that and observations don't exist. So, based on everything else, I suspect he wrote them. His family were great writers. And if it exists, I haven't found it. And I hope somebody, who was also interested in Marcus Winchester might be able to tell me of a secret stash of letters that are hidden. But so we don't really know exactly what he thought, but what we can look at are the fruits of his life. So we can look at the relationships that he had, the people he hung out with, like David Crockett, the things that he did, as a white man with money in the South, during this era, and you can kind of tell the kind of person he probably was.
All right, I'm gonna do a quick recap, and then we're gonna dive in a little bit deeper. So let's keep in mind, folks, that we're talking about a man named Marcus Winchester, who Scott just says he can't find any writings on, that he himself produced. Yet this guy was integral, boots on the ground. With every job, there's always somebody like that in an organization who just does everything, but this guy has been forgotten. Now, controversial stuff now because we had this Trail of Tears. We had, a mass migration of a native people who were being forced out, things that we look back on and go, good grief, what was going on? But historically, we're trying to be accurate. What to me is even more fascinating is that today Memphis is a very integrated city, lovely so. I mean, I very much so, and I love that about our community. But Marcus, and tell me the year. What year are we talking about here when he's in the range?
Yeah, so it's like 1820.
Okay,
that
1820s.
Yeah.
Marcus himself, and I'm going to let you set this up. Marcus was, as this guy who was the first mayor and the first postmaster, was forced to live outside the city limits. Why?
So we're going to back up just a tiny little bit. So I was curious, the more I looked into Marcus Winchester and tried to figure out who was his wife, Amarante Loisel.
Say your name again.
Amarante Loisel.
Amarante
Loisel Winchester.
Okay.
So I was a little curious. She was supposedly black, is what they say. And so the story that I read quickly, if you look at the surface, the story that's out there from people who wrote, 150, 100 years ago, the men who wrote in the newspaper, James Davis, the big, not the clothier, but the historian, writer in Memphis, who you have to take everything he says with a grain of salt because he's like your grandfather. He sort of wrote what was true, but then also what he heard around the pickle barrel. And, so anyway, so the story was So, are you familiar with Thomas Hart Benton?
No.
He was a young whippersnapper politician, that fought in the War of 1812. Buddies with Andrew Jackson. Well, as bros do, they got into a fight.
Okay.
And so Thomas Hart Benton was part of the duel. Him and his brother were part of the duel. Of course, you already know that Andrew Jackson almost, lost an arm in a Nashville hotel and almost bled to death. Anyway, that was Thomas Hart Benton. And so he was a very not well-respected guy amongst the people who loved Andrew Jackson.
Okay,
So
all right.
he was painted as a villain.
All right.
So in the story that James Davis wrote about Marcus Winchester, that was then repeated over and over and over again through the years and rewritten and made worse, is that Thomas Hart Benton came back from New Orleans with a sack of money and a girl that he had just kind of been messing around with, and he went into Marcus Winchester's store, threw the gold coins on the countertop and said, "Look, I don't want to mess with her anymore. You can have her. Here's some money. I'm out of here." And then he left. And so Marcus Winchester then fell in love with this beautiful, girl who was supposedly the most beautiful girl in the South.
And what's her name again?
Amarante Loisel.
Amarante. Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to get
So
that.
he fell in love with her, even though she was, a kept woman. And then the city hated her and hated him for what they had done by,
breaking the cultural
but
taboo.
right. How dare he? What are they thinking? They threw him out of town and her out of town, and he became an alcoholic because he was so upset. And of course, that part was written, when they were trying to, paint the evils
Right.
during Prohibition,
Sure.
the evils
Make him
of
look
liquor.
bad. Sure.
And, so he became a horrible alcoholic and died a broken man, poverty-stricken on the streets.
Is that true?
So that is not true. I
Set the
discovered.
record straight, by the way, while we have a picture of downtown Memphis,
There you go.
which I love. You can see Auction Street and Overton Street. Anyway, so what
I'm
real...
going to talk some more about that in just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
minute if we have time.
We do.
We're going to run
No,
out
we're
of
good.
time.
We're good. So
we may have to do a two-parter.
Okay.
Okay, so what really happened, based on, and again, so much material I think was destroyed or has not been written honestly about that. First of all, Thomas Hart Benton's biographers have proven that story was not true.
Okay.
But he did live across the street from her family in St. Louis. So she had a very, I wouldn't call them affluent, but they
Successful.
owned property. Her father was a fur trader.
Okay.
Fur trading and St. Louis and Memphis, went hand in hand. And so the family story was that they met on a steamboat. So possibly her and her family, or just her, could have been headed down to New Orleans or Natchez or even Memphis, and somebody could have introduced her to Marcus Winchester. Now, she was probably biracial, she was a mixed person, she might have had some black in her. She might have had a family member who was French Canadian. There was no way to prove
What her actual
no one has
ancestry
actually
was.
said what her
Right.
race
What her
actually
descendants-
was.
right.
She was mixed race, more than likely. And so, but that was enough to raise eyebrows slightly. They didn't really start to have problems until we got closer and closer to the Civil War, because she died, in the late 30s, almost 1840. So until she died, but we were getting closer and closer to the fight over slavery, getting more and more polarized. So when they first got married, it was kind of an agreed upon, based on what I've read, it was an agreed upon idea that slavery was not a good thing,
Right.
and that it needed to end.
Yep.
And that it would one day end. And so, but then as people became more and more polarized on the topic, and as more people in the North and more abolitionists, they started making the rules and the laws and the things that the rules that people had to follow in small towns, and in towns like Memphis.
Things got polarized.
They passed a law that said you couldn't be a white man married to a black woman. And so Marcus Winchester and Amarante and their 7 by then kids had to move outside the city limits, and they lived basically in Midtown. Today it would be Midtown.
But that was out of the
back
city
then
limits.
It was in the woods.
But he still has his roles and is still
Right.
completely plugged into the city and making it vibrant.
Right.
But he's forced to live technically out of the city.
Right, and it was not an unusual thing back then for someone to marry or someone to be with an enslaved woman who was black and have children with her. The second mayor of Memphis and a buddy of Crockett's was named Isaac Rawlings. And Isaac Rawlings was also involved. He came after Marcus Winchester was already there. He was a merchant. So he had a store, and the woman that he lived with as his wife was his enslaved person, and they had a child together. They had a little boy, and Isaac Rawlings went to great lengths to free his son. Now, there were all kinds of stipulations around freedom. So if you owned an enslaved person, you couldn't just say, you're free. Multiple reasons. Number one, there was a Tennessee law that said if you are freed, you have to leave Tennessee within 1 year. So
if you're freed,
if you're an enslaved person and they free you, you got to leave Tennessee. Now, the laws changed frequently, so it was hard to keep up with. But so Isaac Rawlings made sure that he freed his son so that he had the option to leave if he wanted to. And then Isaac Rawlings was way wealthier than Marcus Winchester. He owned a lot of the firms downtown. He owned a lot of property. And when he died, he did leave it to his son who had been enslaved. And some of the family members, Isaac Rawlings' brother, sued to say, no, he can't have that because he is an enslaved person. We have to get that. And they lost the case. And so Isaac Rawlings' son won. But then the trail goes cold. I cannot find out what happened to him. What happened next? Where did Isaac Rawlings' son go? So I don't know if he cashed in his chips and went up north and changed his name or whatever. But there were just all sorts of things that we don't realize. When we think of slavery, we put that in a little box, but we don't think about all the political and social things that went on around slavery at the time. There was the Underground Railroad where people sneaked out. Well, surprise, surprise, there was the reverse Underground Railroad where people were kidnapped and taken from the streets of, eastern cities or even from the streets of Memphis and resold into slavery further down south.
Wow.
And once that happened, you'd never see your family members again. So Marcus Winchester here, he ultimately ended up with 8 children who were of mixed race, and so he had to worry about that. And he wrote a letter to Francis Wright, who's a well-known abolitionist and a person who was trying to create a way for slavery to go away. She wrote back the answer in such a way that he was sharing with her his concerns about his own kids getting kidnapped.
Right. So he would have had to have been emotionally invested in trying to get that part of our history changed, trying to move things forward. He had to have been.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. He was. He wanted to move things forward. But ultimately, I would not necessarily say that is the only thing that caused his ultimate failure in financial failure. It certainly contributed to it. There's one paragraph in the book that I'll read to you real quick.
Yeah.
By
the way, you're hearing the author read his own words.
We're doing an author reading.
It's an author reading.
Oh my gosh!
First time too.
First time. This is someone who's from Tennessee, Henderson King Yoakum, who was the mayor of Murfreesboro and the chair of the Tennessee Democratic Convention. He's writing to James K. Polk, another Tennessean. He's trying to get Marcus Winchester to not be able to be the postmaster of Memphis, which was an honor. That was an honor back then. That was a big deal be that in any city. And he wrote and he said, "It's not my business, but," why is he writing? If it's not his business, James K. Polk should have said, well, then why don't you not write me? Right. "It's not my business, but I think if you knew the moral standing of the postmaster here, you would give a tone to public virtue by turning him out. I have it from the best men in Memphis that he has been living in open adultery with a mulatto woman and actually keeps one of his children by her in the post office.
So that's how he was trying to slam Marcus Winchester.
Right. By saying he kept a mulatto woman.
Right.
But the irony of all this is some of the family members, I'm in touch with some of them as part of the research and stuff. And through genealogy and things, they have discovered that there is a very good chance that through Marcus Winchester's second great-grandmother, through his mother, he was also ultimately mixed race, that there was an African-American man in her family who was her third great-grandfather. So, it's ironic that, race played such a big role in politicizing, things back and forth and trying to get him out of his job. Anyway, she ended up passing away.
The wife, Amarante
Loisel, ended up dying. She left 8 children behind with Marcus Winchester, and she died in New Orleans. And I can't figure out why she was in New Orleans. Had she moved to New Orleans? What
was she traveling?
Was she might have been pregnant because we don't have a lot of there's not a lot to fill out about her. At times I would be researching and I would think, wait a minute, did she really exist? Have people made this up? And I'll read you one more paragraph. That when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, that is very telling. I'm almost there. Hold on.
This is what happens when you have an author read a book.
I know, right? And
that's just been written.
Okay, so here it is. So So Marcus Winchester had another buddy. He had a lot of friends. He was obviously very outgoing because he had lots of bros. Lots of bros. So Marcus Winchester had a buddy who was from Scotland, and he would go over to Scotland, buy a bunch of merch, and bring it back. So he had a brand new young wife that had just gotten married. I mean, she was like 15 maybe. Very young.
Okay.
So this guy was older. He goes to Scotland. He dies on the boat coming back. So he had left Marcus Winchester his will and all of his instructions on how to take care of his wife. And so he had actually left money. If something happens to me, please take care of my wife, which I think may be a little bit of the shadow of the story that James Davis told about Benton coming in and setting the gold down. I think maybe it was like a mix mash of those stories. Anyway, so Marcus Winchester, his wife had recently died, a year or so previously. He had a whole bunch of young children. Some of them were actually the same age as his second wife. And so, he married her. He took her to Nashville and they got married. And so she wrote about her own self, and this is from her. This is in a letter she wrote. I recollect the prejudice, the bitter feeling manifested toward me, not because I had a drop of dark or African blood in my veins, but that I had once been the wife of Colonel Winchester, who had at an early day married a wife who was, as the Memphis people would and often did say, was a little, and she put it in quotation marks, was a little off color. But a kinder, nobler-hearted woman never lived than the mother of his now living daughters. So his second wife, who observed all this, afterwards, confirmed for me, that he was married to someone who was mixed race.
Well, and it's fascinating to me that in today's age, mixed race marriages are so commonplace.
Right.
We've come so far. Now, I don't know that we'll ever get away from politicized issues, but that's fascinating to me. All right, let's do this. I've got on the screen right now a picture of the book back, which is about to be released. We're going to talk about that. But did you want to say something about this before we wrap?
Yeah.
This is downtown Memphis.
What's interesting is, and I write about it in the book, is John Overton and Andrew Jackson was out of the picture, for the most part. And so John Overton and James Winchester named it Memphis.
Okay.
He also had a town that he named near Nashville that has gone now called Cairo, Tennessee.
All right.
Not Cairo, Illinois.
Got
Cairo,
it.
Tennessee. He also had sons with. He had a son he named Napoleon.
Okay.
Marcus Winchester's middle name is Marcus Brutus Winchester. So
Sure.
there was a
fascination. A lot of international flair.
Yeah, well,
here.
a lot of that. So he named it, and then they actually had their plan was there were 4 squares that were used for different things, and there was a promenade that went from one end of town to the other, and they didn't want any They didn't want any stores or anything built along the promenade.
Is that Tom Lee Park?
Tom Lee Park, yeah, Tom Lee Park's like right.
Okay, all right.
I guess people can't see.
Well,
me.
if you followed it south.
I forgot we were on your podcast.
Yeah, you can,
I'm just talking.
Yeah, it's visual.
Yeah, I'm
It's
just
visual.
talking.
No, that's good.
So it's down there, and several times. One time, John Overton made a surprise visit, and he was very cranky. He was a cranky old man, even when he was like 16, I suspect, based on what I read. But he comes, and they had maybe it was that other picture. They had gone up over the promenade and dug a road so people could get. And he's like, "That is not what I agreed to. I want a promenade from one end of town to the other, so the people of my town can walk up and down
And see the river.
and see the river." And so, you think, well, that was a long time ago, Scott, that's just history. Yawn, yawn. There was a lawsuit recently from the Friends of Our Riverfront, who were descendants of John Overton, who sued to stop the construction of the museum that's being put downtown.
Yeah.
On top of the promenade. And
Wow, because of that.
Because of that. Because that, now I'm not going to evaluate what's right or what's wrong there. And I'm sorry to my museum friends,
Don't apologize.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad, bringing it up. It's probably a sensitive subject.
Well, you're an author.
That's true. I'm just telling the truth. And it could, and to be completely honest, I haven't really dove that much into it. So it could be that it's a little bit off, but there were already some things built there on the promenade. And they were going to tear it down. And the folks who were the Friends of Our Riverfront are very passionate, as I am too, about the city and about downtown. Downtown for them connects to their ancestor,
Right.
and probably connects to their people that they remembered. Okay. Side note, I know we're in a hurry. Side note, my grandfather, when I was a little kid growing up in Parkway Village, he would come and pick me up from Brownsville, Tennessee, and take me to Court Square, where there was the big fountain.
Yep, still there.
And we would feed the squirrels and the pigeons, and that is a core memory for me that, really triggered a lot of things for me positive. And, we spent a lot of time together. My Uncle Bobby was a butcher there at Easy Way Grocery downtown.
I love that.
And so we would go in there and hang out with him a little while, and then we would go eat in one of the restaurants. So for me, downtown is not just a series of buildings and roads, and it's a true emotional place.
Got a touchstone there.
Now, one more thing that you think, oh, this is all history, this is all old, this is nothing. So not too long ago, the cranes were digging up at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to build a parking lot. They're going to put a parking lot there. I had a nephew who was at St. Jude, so I know the great work those folks do. Shout out to St. Jude, but all of a sudden somebody's digging up and they're like, that looks a lot like bones, like human bones. And so they, when that happens, there's a whole series of things you have to do. Well, they were actually digging at Winchester Cemetery. So
Marcus,
the cemetery that Marcus donated, and the cemetery that a huge number of the founders of Memphis, Tennessee are buried in. But it's been a city park for a long time. And there's a whole chapter on the book about that. And at the end of the book, I list every single person that we know of that was buried in Winchester Cemetery, because their headstones are all gone. It was a problem for many years that they didn't take care of the headstones. Several different groups tried, and ultimately it was all raised, and it was just made into a field. They built the horse stables on top of Marcus Winchester's unmarked grave.
that was my next question. Where is he buried?
He was buried underneath the city stables, and then
That doesn't seem very honorific for a man who helped build the city.
Yeah, it was not.
Okay.
It was not, and I wonder why.
Yeah.
And so he then they knocked that down and put the bus garage there. So he laid under the bus garage for a while, and then St. Jude bought it, and they're building a parking garage now. A parking garage for St. Jude is a very important thing. If anyone's ever had, patients that are there,
Sure.
and they're doing great work. So the doctors need a place to park.
Yep.
So and honestly, all these years later, it's for the most part dust, and So I think a memorial somewhere like Elmwood Cemetery would make sense.
Yep.
One of my favorite places in Memphis,
Which is really cool.
So some kind of monument with the names on it of the people that we know that were buried there. Because if you look through the list at the back of the book, I have an addendum of all the people. You look through and you read all the names. There's about 900 names that we know of people that were there. So
All right. Let's do this.
Okay.
Where can they buy this book? Where can you get this? This is my very special. You can't have this.
That's right.
Early copy that says not for resale, or I could sell it to you. Where can they get this?
Yeah, not for resale. November 21st. It'll be on Amazon.
November 21st on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. And
By
then,
the way, let me read can I read this on the back?
You can.
Deeply researched and compellingly told, this book presents early Memphis in its full historical context, a brilliant achievement. And that's a quote by Carol Van West, who is a noted Tennessee state historian. I love what you do. Hey, and friends, listen, not everybody loves to read. I do. I will tell you this about Scott's book. He takes history and makes it something you want to dive into, which is what the good writers do. It's not dry. It's something you kind of go, good grief, I kind of feel like I'm there and I'm reliving it. I didn't know anything about this guy. Townmania comes from a letter from his dad.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
About the city being built. And I didn't know anything about it. It's his dad, Marcus Winchester's dad, that the street Winchester is named after. So we don't have anything. But now we do.
And if somebody wants to just learn more, they don't want to buy the book, they can go to rscottwilliams.info, and there's a lot of stuff on there.
rscottwilliams.info
is my website, and they can go and just read all kinds of, I put a lot of stuff on there.
Okay, listen, you're going to be seeing and hearing more from Scott. We've got more to talk about in the upcoming weeks. Again, fascinating dude, longtime friend, November 21st on Amazon. Right around the corner. It'd be a great Christmas gift for someone who loves history, loves the city of Memphis, just loves to get down and learn about stuff around them. Thank you, Scott, for being here. Of course, I need to say another thank you to our friends at Lexus of Memphis, of great people and a great product. You all know that. I talk about it all the time. And if you have a question or a comment, email us here on The Current Temp. It's really easy, thecurrenttemp@gmail.com. Make sure and subscribe on YouTube. You can see this on my Facebook feed, or you can listen to it on Spotify. Scott Williams, CEO and President of Discovery Park. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys.